Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, lights out for millions in Texas as they are experiencing one of the worst winter storms in over a century. Now, many are dealing with no electricity in freezing temperatures. We'll have all those details and many more. Now, this extreme winter weather has created an emergency across several states. Now, after the first storm, millions are without electricity, which means no heat and no water. There have been 15 deaths so far due to the freezing temperatures, as well as 5 reported tornadoes in North Carolina and Georgia. Now, one was an EF3 with winds of 160 miles per hour. Now, that tornado touched down in Brunswick County, North Carolina, where it killed 3 people.
Oh, that's horrible. With the coldest temperatures on record in more than a century and a second storm heading in the same path, many people are bracing for the worst. Well, Chicago got 1.5 feet of fresh snow, making for a slow commute. While in Lima, Ohio, semis were forced to pull off to the side of Interstate 75 due to blizzard-like conditions. But probably the largest and most dangerous situation across the country right now is the power outages in 13 states already.
Well, Houston, Texas is covered in a blanket of snow as well, but what is angering residents is images of the city's downtown lit up like a Christmas tree while the surrounding neighborhoods go without power. Now, being in the dark isn't even the worst of it. No electricity means no running water and no heat in sub-zero weather. Now, in an effort to stay warm, some families have suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning in Houston. 140 cases have been reported so far.
Wow, that's sad. Across the state of Texas alone, millions have had no power for 2 days in a row, and fears that the death toll will continue to rise has caused places like Galveston County to request the state to bring in refrigerated trucks to hold as many as 50 bodies. Well, a county judge there, Mark Henry, told ABC News, "Well, we're not projecting anything, but I'm afraid that I don't have a whole lot of room for optimism here."
Well, Texas hasn't seen temperatures this low in over 100 years. Without electricity, families are trying to keep warm any way they can, while freezing and bursting pipes damage many homes and neighborhoods. Now, one of the saddest scenes, but not isolated, a Houston woman and an 8-year-old girl were found dead in their running car trying to stay warm while the car was parked in their closed garage. Now, another man and a 7-year-old boy were taken to the hospital for treatment.
Well, Houston Police Lieutenant Larry Crowson explains the dangers to news reporters. He said, "I know it's cold, but you got to be careful about using generators or a car inside a garage or any type of fire. Carbon monoxide is odorless and it can kill people very easily." Well, 6 people from another family also were taken to the hospital. A mother and a child are in critical condition there. The family was heating charcoal inside their home for heat.
Well, tragedy in Sugar Land overnight. A grandmother and her 3 grandchildren died in a house fire. Now, the cause of the fire is not yet known. Firefighters in Houston were experiencing frozen hydrants as they tried to battle a blaze at an apartment building. Now, without the use of hydrants, they only had the water their trucks could carry, which made for a difficult challenge with such a large fire. And at that, all they could do is hope that they can keep it from spreading, because you can't try to battle the blaze with no water.
That's right. Now, Texas Governor Greg Abbott said in an interview with KTRK, "This is the winter version of Hurricane Harvey, and we will learn from this also." Well, in large cities, there are long lines for food and supplies at restaurants and stores that are still open. In a state famous for its oil, there is now a shortage of fuel at the pumps, leaving some stranded.
Well, because of the extreme conditions, the U.S. power grid is being stretched to its limits, causing rolling blackouts across 14 states. Now, COVID-19 testing and vaccinations have also been put on hold in 19 states due completely to this weather experience.
Well, 4 days into this unusual, rare below zero temperatures, 500,000 people in Texas are still without electricity, and the governor is calling for power officials to be investigated. A quarter of the residents who have had their power restored are now faced with having to boil their water for drinking. That's right. When the power came back on to water treatment plants, they could not keep up with the demand and have had to let the water enter the system without treatment.
Well, being America's second largest populated state, Texas, with 29 million residents, it is the only state that has its own electricity grid. Now, what that means is that it is actually separate from the national system and is allowed to bypass federal regulations that might have prevented such power outages if they had been in place.
ERCOT, which stands for the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, is coming under fire for failing to keep the lights on and the heat as well. Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz is also facing some heat for deserting fellow Texans to take his family to Cancun, Mexico for a vacation a few days into the weather that has caused the deep freeze crisis in his home state.
Well, the Associated Press released one Houston official addressing her fellow citizens in a very honest and compassionate manner. This is what she had to say. She said, "Houston, the next few days are going to be very tough. To those who have lost power, I know you are frustrated. I know you are miserable. I know you are uncomfortable. I know it is very miserable in this cold without heat. Things will likely get worse before they get better. There is a high chance the power will be out for these folks until the weather gets better, which will not be for a couple of days."
Well, as far as locally, Abilene, Texas was also hit very hard by the record-breaking cold. KTAB anchor Joni McKinnon explained that with so many people left without electricity for so many days, things are getting pretty serious. McKinnon said, quote, "Many folks are in the dark and cold, forcing people into survival mode."
I bet. Well, our field correspondent Larry McGee has been covering more of these stories here at home in Abilene, Texas, including the boil water notice that all residents are under now, and also some of the damage caused by this freezing weather. Larry, what's the latest?
The problem for many is that where bad choices are concerned, the consequences are not always immediate. Extreme and unprecedented environmental throes, such as those recently experienced in much of the U.S., must be evidence, however, that consequences which reveal themselves eventually are no less devastating than those which manifest themselves instantly. Due to the eco-immunological deep freeze which struck hardest in Texas, residents of Abilene have been without water. And now that the freeze is lifting and services are beginning to creep back into slight operation, city officials are reminding citizens of a fact which might have been easy to forget before the crisis. The city's water supply is deeply contaminated, and with water treatment facilities having been paralyzed due to extreme weather, boil notices have been issued to caution residents to extend an effort to reduce impurities within the water before attempting to drink it. It's not just Abilene, however. An estimated 13 million across Texas are receiving the same reminder and notice, if they even have water to boil. As the temperature tenuously stabilizes and other aspects of the crisis are unfolding, with the thaw has come bursting pipes and catastrophic home damage, which has added another layer of distress to the calamity. Worse even yet still have been fires raging out of control as firemen watch and stand by helplessly. The state's governor issued an address promising both restorative and preventative action. Reports are that the state was merely minutes away from a complete grid collapse and absolute loss of power. As it was, scores of people were without energy, resulting in deaths. In the worst cases, millions of people were without power as the country's energy sector buckled under the convulsions of the environment and the overwhelming needs of the people. Families were without and in desperate search of food, Large portions of the country essentially became a block of ice, and officials are forecasting that more wicked weather is on the way. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. For Time Jeff, back to you.
Like many things we report on, not many are left unscathed by this. It kind of makes me think about the statement, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You know, I think this is causing a lot of people to think about preparations for something like this occurring in the future.
Right, and ERCOT's representative there saying that they were minutes, if not seconds away from total failure of the electrical grid here in Texas. And of course, it's still bad for many residents here in Texas, but it could have been a lot worse if the whole grid went down.
Yeah, especially when you take into consideration that so many of our utilities, our resources, rely on electricity
right,
in order to get them to our homes or to the service stations or grocery stores and many other places that we need on a daily basis. Well, that same storm system that affected Texas has been moving east and is predicted to dump 6 to 12 inches from West Virginia to Massachusetts, along with freezing rain and sleet. Well, the I-95 corridor already has several inches of snow on Thursday, and on the border of Virginia and West Virginia, temperatures there are forecasted to stay in the 20s, meaning any snowfall that is to come at this point is going to stay on the ground, making problems worse because the power lines and trees are already pretty heavy with snow.
Well, in Texas, as we've been reporting, over 3 million people are still in the dark. Not only that, but people are having to deal with the busted water pipes and living creatively without running water by heating snow, closing off as many cracks and crevices from the cold as possible and huddling together to preserve heat. Now, Bill Magnus, the CEO of ERCOT, the company that manages 90% of Texas's electric grid, is warning Texans to prepare for more rolling blackouts. He said, "We had to reduce the demand to get the supply and demand back in balance that was necessary to prevent a catastrophic failure."
Well, going on 4 days of no power in Texas, many are wondering how such an energy independent and energy rich state such as Texas couldn't continue to supply power and heat to its citizens during a record freeze. Even the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, is calling for an investigation as to why ERCOT couldn't keep power and heat on. He said in an interview with CBN News, ERCOT stands for Electric Reliability Council of Texas, and they showed that they were not reliable.
Well, natural gas, solar, nuclear, oil, and wind all froze up during the winter deep freeze. Now, supporters of oil and gas said the fact that nearly half, which is about 5,600 of all the wind turbines in the state froze up, shows the limitations of alternative energy sources. Now, Abbott said that this even shows how the Green New Deal, which the goal is actually to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the consequences of climate change, would be a deadly deal for the United States of America.
Well, to add injury to insult, in the face of this historic deep freeze, millions have been left without food or, as we mentioned earlier, clean drinking water, leading to miles-long lines at food banks and water distribution sites. President Biden said he will sign a new emergency declaration for the state of Texas. And of course, people in Louisiana and Mississippi are also facing many of the same challenges. Now, in San Antonio, Texas, firefighters struggled to battle a blaze with limited supply of water coming from the hydrants.
Well, families are wondering how they're going to handle the repair bills once the cold moves on. Now, the cost of this disaster is speculated to be $50 billion, and the human life stands at 44 lives lost due to the extreme weather conditions. Now, some of those people freezing to death in their own homes when the power went out. And as we reported, it's going to rival the damage done from a hurricane. Just this cold weather and how much damage it has done to this area.
Yeah, and then you figure a lot of elderly or disabled people who are not able to leave their homes or not alone move around in their homes, they're kind of left in that condition without any resources. Right. That's sad. Well, more COVID news as over 38 million people have received their initial dose and over 14 million have received their second dose. While states are opening up more vaccination facilities, supplies are running low. Since October, new cases are at their lowest and hospitalizations are down 46%. But experts speculate that this could be the new calm before the storm and telling everyone to brace themselves, saying that the next 14 weeks will be the worst of the pandemic.
Well, New York is also treating its first case of a new variant of COVID. Now, Dr. Jeremy Kamal, a resident from Louisiana, the state virologist there, is one of the scientists who recently found evidence of at least 7 homegrown variants of COVID, which intensifies the race to vaccinate as these variants could become more contagious. And that's what they're worried about. Is the COVID-19 mutating, and now the vaccinations are basically pointless because those strains are now a different strain than when they first developed a vaccine for.
And they don't exactly know how the mutation has changed the way the virus is going to act within the person. Is it going to be more contagious? Is it going to be more lethal? So it's kind of up in the air, but they're really trying to push to get more people vaccinated, as you just said there. Well, the director of the CDC said that vaccination efforts are being stepped up as the variant strain discovered in the UK could be the dominant strain by the end of next month. The U.S. has confirmed more than 27.6 million cases since the pandemic began and more than 486,000 COVID-related confirmed deaths.
We'll take a look at this interview with Dr. Jabala and Korean Times regarding COVID-19 and what we know.
Thank you for your time today, Dr. Jabala. Let's get straight into the virus. So how much do we know about this COVID-19 virus?
We know that it's the same member of a larger family of these viruses known as coronaviruses. They actually exist everywhere. They spend a lot of their time with animals. So this is the third virus that has crossed. So we have SARS-1, MERS, and now SARS-2. We are beginning a completely uncharted journey with this virus. We don't understand a lot because the behavior is completely different. I was very surprised at the outbreak in China, the numbers of people that were infected in such a relatively small period of time. It's very unusual. There are so many talk out there, but it's not following the same rules as the other viruses. This virus is much more aggressive and much more lethal. And for every virus, there is a certain level of lethality. There is a lethal dose. There is how much of this virus you need to have in your lungs before it kills you or before it makes you sick. With this virus, it's not very clear. It's actually very disturbing. There have been some interesting reports that they've had people who were sick and they were cured. They released them out of the hospital and then they got reinfected. The truth is very simple. The assays that we do every day to test this virus, they can only test a certain limit. And if the virus level goes below that threshold, you're not going to detect it, meaning you're going to release the patient and say you're healthy enough to leave. What I find alarming is we are releasing all these patients, telling them they are virus-free, and they go back to the community. It's not your average SARS, it's not your average MERS. Many people, including me, we start calling it a very mysterious, very cryptic virus because we don't understand it. And it doesn't seem to only attack the lungs, it seems to also attack the heart, and it seems also to attack the liver. Now, the elderly are really the first category that get affected a lot because as we get older, our immune system declines. Between the elderly and the adolescent to probably 56 years old, their lifestyles will dictate how vulnerable they are to a virus. Between the elderly and the adolescent to probably 56 years old, their lifestyles will dictate how vulnerable they are to a virus. What I have observed, which is very different to the MERS, is the rate of infection of young is lower. It doesn't mean that we don't have to close schools or we can let our kids outside play. It means that for now, these are the trends that we are observing.
There's so many unknowns about this COVID-19, and China, the Chinese government, is responsible for this lack of information. Do you think this is actually becoming an obstacle for developing a vaccine sooner?
China is not forthcoming with a lot of this information. This information is coming in different bits and pieces, and I think there are some fantastic people around the world that are spending time dissecting that information and putting it together. It's not so much for developing a vaccine, but to study the trajectory of where this virus is going. Right now, we're in the middle of a storm, and a vaccine is not going to help. Right now, we're in the middle of a storm, and a vaccine is not going to help. Right now, we're in the middle of a storm, and a vaccine is not going to help. Your immune system is really what's protecting you.
Well, as if COVID-19 itself wasn't creating enough mass hysteria in the health community, now we have to worry about these mutations changing the game altogether. And you know, the medical industry already doesn't know enough about COVID to know how it acts, what it affects, you know, how to even treat it. Now they've got this added burden of these new mutations that are coming in that, you know, again, that kind of makes the hole a little bit deeper as to how they're going to deal with COVID-19.
Right, and the whole medical field was very concerned when the coronavirus first came out, it was first discovered, and how fast it spread. But now they're actually looking at how these variants are even more contagious,
More lethal.
and really, you know, nothing has been, or actually, nothing has gotten better at this point. It's only getting worse.
Right.
These variants are stronger, they're more contagious, and it seems like the medical field now is really worried where we're going to go from this point.
Yeah, which, like we mentioned earlier, is in their minds is their push to get more people vaccinated in hopes to kind of stave off the consequences of COVID-19. But, you know, again, that's just kind of wishful thinking because they really don't know what these variant strains could do and if the vaccine will even have any effect on the new strains.
Right, and the people who are, you know, we've already seen cases where people that were vaccinated getting this other strain. So
right.
They're already seeing that it's basically ineffective against these new variants.
Yeah, evidence of after 5 months, people becoming reinfected with COVID-19 yet once again. Well, Yisrael Hawkins in the House of Yahweh has been bringing forth information from the sacred scriptures regarding the very times that we're in, and showing the scriptures actually show that this is the first of 7 plagues and that things are prophesied to only get worse. But you don't have to be a part of those who suffer from these plagues. You can save yourself and your family by contacting the House of Yahweh and requesting your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
Well, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them at any of their websites by going to yahweh.com, yisraelhawkins.com, or yahwehsbranch.com. You can also go to our website if you'd like to by going to ypnnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh by emailing info@yahweh.com. If you would like to call internationally, you can call the number that's on your screen now. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and check out the Yisrael Says program by going to yisraelsays.com and the Ask Yisrael program by going to askyisrael.com. You'll be glad you did.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next with life-saving information, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.